Okay, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining our Empowering Business with Microsoft Power Platform webinar series. This is the second webinar in the series. If you missed the first one, feel free to reach out to us and we can get you that content. So we're just gonna, next slide, Pat. So today we're going to go through the MDS introductions, a little bit about who we are and why we would want to listen to us. And then we're going to go into the common data model. What is it? What do we do with it? And then from there, Pat will go into his use case demo, and this is the bulk of the importance of why PowerApps can help empower your business. So we'll be using the West Indies Oil and Gas Enterprise as an example for the PowerApps creation, and then we'll talk a little bit about next steps. So who is MDS? Marine Data Systems was founded in 1994, about 25 years ago. We are a 100% women business enterprise, so we're a women-owned business. We're headquartered in New York City with branch offices in Florida, Texas, and Puerto Rico. So we do have a presence in the Caribbean and Latin American region. We have about 80 industry partners varying from cybersecurity, productivity applications, infrastructure, cloud, wide range of industry companies, industry partners to help us grow your business. And then we also have about 70 engineers and technology consultants. So our four main practice groups are security and compliance, infrastructure, so that deals with cloud, virtual desktops, voice over IP, and then we have productivity applications. That's the practice group that we're going to be discussing today. Pat, he's an engineer for the productivity and applications practice area, and he'll be leading the bulk of the presentation. And then we also have managed services, so we can be an extension of your IT team. These are just some of our industries. So, we're not, we don't have any fallbacks on any of the industries. We have capabilities in healthcare, finance, government. We have our certifications to be able to provide for government entities, public utilities. We have a strong education practice, as well as manufacturing and real estate. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we have quite a few different partners that help us and help our customers. So this is just a quick snapshot of the different companies that we work with. As you can see, we're partners with all of the big cloud providers. We have quite a few cybersecurity. We have some distributors and hardware providers, as well as some SD-WAN and infrastructure companies. Next slide. And this is just a quick overview of our awards from the past few years. Last year we won some really major Microsoft awards around security and compliance. As you know, that is a growing industry, and it's very important for every company to have a good cybersecurity framework. Next slide. And then this is just our Microsoft competencies, as this is a Microsoft presentation. As you can see, we are a gold data analytics partner, so we meet all the criteria that Microsoft sets for Microsoft partners, and we have delivered that for our customers. And so now I'm going to hand it over to Pat, who's going to do the bulk of the presentation and help you guys out with PowerApps.
Hey, thank you, Sam. And good afternoon, everyone, and thank you guys for joining us again during the continuation of our Power Platform series. And for those of you who did not attend our previous session, the contents that was sent out to you earlier, what you'll find it includes a completed version of the device ordering app. That was the solution that we focused on during our last webinar on this particular series. And so what we wanted to do was, because obviously with our sessions just being an hour long, we wanted to be able to give you guys the ability to at least take in what we present and then be able to build and craft and work with the solution on your own, as well as to be able to have some of the source material, right? So that way you can grow and be able to develop the solutions that we go over during this Power Platform series. So what we think you guys will certainly find in today's particular session is that we are actually going to focus on the common data model. And as a part of our series on the Power Platform, particularly I feel like this is more so going to be the glue that kind of brings everything together, right? So, you know, for those of you who joined us last time, we really spent a lot of time talking about PowerApps, going over the IDE, working with the forms, and really trying to get an understanding of how we would be able to create that user experience using Microsoft's PowerApps solution. What we're now going to do is we're going to take that same form, that same solution that we built in PowerApps, and we're going to go ahead and start adding on to it, right? So during the last session, we spent some time going over and talking about how we would bring in data. But what we did is we utilized a CSV. Today, what we're going to take a look at is saying, hey, you know what? We're going to now say, we're going to connect that Power App solution to a database or a repository that allows you to be able to capture that data and then be able to perhaps take it and provide greater insights, some of the analytical solutions to the rest of your organization. And so what we're taking a look at here right now is really just a high-level view of the process of what we're looking to build. So, you know, again, for those of you that are new to our series, you know, this is going to be a 4-part series. Today is the second session. And what we want to do is to be able to present how PowerApps would be a line of business solution to help you supplement your current investment in Office 365 and be able to bring all of those solutions together. For instance, for those of you that are on Office 365 and went through that experience of migrating perhaps from an on-premise system to Office 365, there may be some current workloads that you have still that reside on premise, right? It could be maybe a workflow, or perhaps it can be that access application that's on someone's desktop, right? And so as you try to become a little bit more of a modern workplace and certainly be able to transform your organization to a true digital organization, you would certainly like to be able to bring some of those line of business solutions into your Office 365 presence. And so what we're going to do during this series is just really kind of talk about how you go through that. And so as I mentioned before, the common data service really is a big part of that. And so as we're kind of taking a look at the architecture here and really kind of related to what this particular series, you know, we started with the Power App solution, right? Our device ordering solution was a form that allowed our fictional organization, West Indies Oil and Gas, to be able to provide to their internal customers a way to order computers, order laptops, right? And so what we want to talk about today is when you actually do capture those orders, right? What can you do with it, right? How can you take that information and perhaps build off of it, utilize it throughout the rest of your organization? And of course, this is just one use case as we take a look at utilizing Power Apps, right? We can take that particular use case and apply it to other areas throughout your business, whether it's receiving invoices, right? Whether it's updating a form. What the common data service allows you to do is to be able to take that information, take the underlying data structure, and reuse it in other parts of your either Office 365 presence or Azure. Okay. So what exactly is the common data service, right? So the Common Data Service lets you securely store and manage data that's used by business applications, right? And data that's common within the Common Data Service is stored within a set of what's called entities. And a way to think of an entity is, for those of you particularly who's worked with databases and really are familiar with that tabular structure, right? An entity is a set of records used to store data, similar to how that table that we talked about in the database would store data. So the Common Data Service, it includes a base set of standard entities that cover typical scenarios. And we're going to take a look at the Common Data Service, and really underneath the Common Data Service is what's called the Common Data Model, right? And so what that Common Data Model does, it allows you to be able to create entities specific to your organization, allows you to populate it with data using Power Query. And one of the sub-themes of our webinar series is unify your business, right? And so if you were to take a look at that, what the Common Data Service and definitely the Common Data Model allows is for you to be able to come up with a data schema enforcement strategy, or as we like to call it, governance. But again, I know sometimes that's a word that particularly us in IT don't like to use because it makes our users cringe. However, when we want to ensure that we build upon efficiency to be able to make some of our solutions adhere to maybe our Office 365 investment or Azure, or perhaps just to be able to have a common way that all of our applications and solutions within our organization talk to each other, or if they were to perhaps integrate with each other, being able to save yourself some time during some of those small to medium and large projects, right? Where you spending moments just trying to figure out, how are we going to represent a contact in this system the same way that it's represented in that system, right? So what the Common Data Model does is it gives you that base set of records, that standard, to where when you're now describing that data, right, you're now able to speak the same language and talk the same way. And so within the Common Data Service, as you see within this particular diagram we have here, right, it shows that it starts with Common Data Service for apps. And to give you guys a little background on that, it really originated with Dynamics, right? So within Microsoft CRM, ERP solutions, the Common Data Service was the structure for all of its underlying data within those repository. And so now what Microsoft has done with the Power Platform, particularly with PowerApps, it's made that same structure readily available for organizations who's looking to build on top of that very successful data architecture. And now you're able to create your own custom solutions using that very same data structure. And now once you capture that data, and so for the instance, in our particular use case of our webinar, we're capturing device ordering information. And so as you can see here, maybe down the road, an organization may want to take a look at the way they're ordering equipment, right? They may want to take a look at maybe there's some way that we can gain or provide some more efficiency in the process. Being able to capture that data, save that data, and as we have here in an Azure Data Lake, and as a part of this series, we're certainly going to talk about that a little bit more, but think of the data lake as a structure where you can not just only store tabular data, but you can also store blob objects, maybe a CSV, maybe some other external files. And to me, that's really the beauty of the data lake, because now you're not really going to have to say, hey, you know what, that data is not acceptable. However, by having the Common Data Service and adhering to that particular model, you now have that commonality. And then now you can be able to define that data, store that data. And for some of the analysts and the some of the C-level folks, you'll be able to get some comprehensive insights into that data and be able to provide value throughout your organization. So as we were talking about a little bit before, some of the users who would really gain from having the common data model. As you kind of see here, obviously the theme and the solution we're focusing on this particular series is the Power Platform. As you see here, particularly on the left side of this diagram, you'll notice we have Power BI Dynamics 365. And really underneath that, particularly on the dynamic side, right, you're seeing the CDS for apps. And so what Microsoft is saying here, whether it's one of our low to no code solutions, where obviously our intended users are typically business analysts, right, or maybe some of our power users or some of our skilled information workers, right, we're giving them a solution, a semantic layer where they can interact with that underlying data. And so as we kind of talked about before, when we talked about the common data model, and we'll take a look at that here in a little bit, it does give you that underlying structure. So now whether it's Power BI or it's Dynamics, or maybe it's an Office 365, we can adhere to that same data structure. And then we also talked about maybe other line of business solutions within your organization, right? And let's just say it's an IT and you're working on a project and perhaps you're working with some of the designers, right? And perhaps maybe you having those designers design a user experience form, right? What we're now saying is with having that common structure, you can interact with them. You would be able to have a process to where now those same folks who may be used to working in Adobe world, and they now interact with those information workers, those developers, and we can now have a common structure, right, where we're able to communicate, share data, and store it essentially in the same place. So what we want to do today, we're going to spend a little bit more time just kind of going into our PowerApps IDE. And as we introduced during our last session, we took a look at the PowerApps, which is called the Maker Portal, which is really the way that we kind of drive creating our PowerApps solution. But what we're also going to do today is we're going to start taking a look at that data structure, right? And so what we want to do is spend some time just understanding, particularly with our use case with the device ordering app, what happens with that data when we go in and we perform one of those device ordering transactions, right? What happens to that data? Where does that data store? And how can we enable our own environment to be able to utilize the common data service, to be able to see that data, to be able to work with it, and then also maybe prepare it to export it and send it off somewhere where for future, whatever business decisions you'd like to make in the future, you can have that data and you can store it, perhaps like we talked about before, maybe in an Azure data lake, and maybe eventually you want to visualize that data to create reports. This is really the start of it. This is the foundation, and we're going to spend some time today taking a look at that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then I'm going to switch over, and we're going to start taking a look at my IDE, and we'll just walk through that environment. Okay, so for those, everyone that, on the call today, you should have received the document that really kind of walks you through the process of kind of taking the orders, establishing our common data model, and really the main entity that we're going to take a look at, and that's going to be the focus of today's webinar, is the device ordering entity, right? Because when we perform those transactions, we want to have a way to capture it. And we're going to learn today what the entity is, right? How we can see that underlying data and how we get to work with it. Now, one of the first things, though, that I identified in that companion document that we sent out this morning was being able to establish your environment, right? And so as we're kind of taking a look at today, we wanted to be able to first isolate that environment, isolate that data that we're now about to build. away from the rest of your environment, right? So what I did in my particular case, and as you see below here, is I created the MDS Showcase West Indies environment. And so now I have this environment that's just specific to the solution that we're going to build, right? And so for those of you that are going to go ahead and build it, it's very important that we start with that new environment. And so as is specified in here, we were to click on a new environment. And again, I'm going to walk through the steps that's involved in being able to build our common data service and the model behind it. So I just want to make sure that I present, all of the specific tasks that goes into coming up with this structure. So we would create a new environment, right? And so if I was to click on that, and it would take me to our platform, Power Platform Admin Center, right? And so what the Power Platform Admin Center allows us to do is to be able to kind of move forward, establish our environment name, select a region, and then an environment type. One of the things I certainly want to point out as we kind of talk about this, and for those of you who are noticing here, my screen at the very top is jumping here. I'm not sure. It's probably one of those things with Teams, but we can still be able to kind of see kind of moving forward. But what I'd like to do, particularly, as we kind of take a look at the Power Platform and the Admin Center and creating our environment, kind of walk through what's really some of the main things that we're going to take a look at, right? And so as you can see here, when we're creating that environment, as we mentioned before, we want to come up with a name, right? We certainly also would like to make sure that this is a trial, right? Because of course, this is going to be a demo and demo data and everything like we talked about. We want to keep it separate, right? And so that's going to be critical. And then one of the other things certainly you'd want to is keep the region. I'm assuming everyone on the call here in the US, but obviously, based on your environment, you'll certainly create that. And then I would say really critical for this exercise, and as we kind of go forward and looking at creating our PowerApps solution, right, which is, this is going to be, for those of you who's kind of, have that engineering background and been through that process, right, a CRUD application, right, a create, read, update, delete, you certainly want to have that repository. And so when we're now talking about creating, what Microsoft calls model-driven apps, right? The model within that term is the common data service. And when we create a database for our environment here, it's going to give you that out-of-the-box default CDM structure. And so when we talked about CDM, and I know I referenced it before, I want to give you guys a little bit background about how the CDM looks, right? And so we remember we were talking about the common data service and the fact that it's, it's really kind of that underlying glue that really kind of provides a base set of records, right? A common data schema that you'd be able to reuse throughout your Office 365 apps, as well as other external apps, right? Within that is the common data model schema, right? And so, as you see here, and again, it's available on GitHub, so everyone in the call can certainly go ahead and take a look at this. But as we kind of talk about being able to store data that comes from our PowerApps solution, it's going to use this same structure. And so you'll notice here within this CDM definition, Microsoft kind of has identified at the very top here, the Dynamics 365 CRM data structure, right? And so as you can see, it really kind of starts with an account. And then you see the appointment and a contact. And so as we were talking a little bit before, when we started this particular session, I said, hey, if you want to be able to describe a contact from your solution to maybe another line of solution that also have contacts, right? You want to have a way to be able to have that uniformity to share that data. And so as we begin to see here, and in particular within this model, you're seeing Microsoft kind of share some of those solutions where it's based on some of their Dynamics or business application solutions. But one of the important things, and what we'll see here as a part of this particular session, is the fact that you can actually create and add your own entity, right? You can be able to move forward with that, okay? So as we were talking about before, you certainly want to be able to create your database. And once we move forward from that, and like I mentioned before, I've already deployed my solution here, so I won't go through that, but certainly the steps that I went through in creating my solution, that was shared with you guys earlier in that email that you received with your companion document, okay? And so once we're able to create our solution and we are up and running and we have our environment. And one thing to bear in mind, guys, when you do create your environment, it does sometimes take either between 10 to 20 minutes, it really depends, just really on the bandwidth and the availability, but certainly expect some time for that environment to be spun up, okay? So once we get done creating that environment, right, we're going to now want to take a look at being able to create our solution, right? And so one of the things that you certainly should be familiar, and this is one of the things that we went through when we were going through our first session, is the maker portal, right? This is going to be the area where you're going to do most of your development for your Power App solution, as well as maybe the entire Power Apps infrastructure for your line of business solutions that you decide to create with Power Apps. And that could be a form, or for those of you who are familiar with the Power Apps portal, this is going to be the IDE that you'll usually work in, okay? And so what I'm going to do here, and for those of you who are kind of following along, right, I sent out a couple of packages. And so what you'd want to do is you'd want to import, initially, you're going to take a look at the solution that I added. And so when you import that solution, what it's going to do is it's going to actually deploy the form, the completed device form that we looked at earlier. And we're going to take a look at that here in a little bit. And so once that gets done, you can now go into the app section and you'll see your device ordering app, right? And so now it's available and it's up and running. And so now we can actually go into that particular solution, right? And then we can now begin to work with it. And so one of the ways that we can kind of, be able to work with it, you'll be able to first, we can just click play, right? And so what that does, just to refamiliarize us with the app that we built last time, is our device ordering app, right? And so what this was is a way for us to be able to, as we mentioned with this use case, is to give some of our internal customers a way to order just some new assets, right? And so let's say we're going to go ahead and seeing that we're working with Microsoft right now. I'll go ahead and check that, right? And we're going to go ahead and just pair it, and we're going to say, so we can know this is our order, devices, okay? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to submit that device request, right? And so we can take note of the time. It's telling me my request has been successfully submitted. We see the name, it's telling us the price, and just really some notes, right? So we'll click OK for now. And so part of what we're talking about here, and really this is kind of, it goes at the heart of what we're doing, is, we now want to say, hey, you know what? Let's take a look at those solutions. So one of the things you want to do is you want to go back to your maker portal, right? And we're going to go ahead and take a look at entities. And so guys, remember we were talking a little bit before about the entities that we have and what that means. And really just to kind of, bring it home, entities are really used as a model, right? As a way to manage business data. So within our particular use case here, we're developing our device ordering app, right? And so with this device ordering app, and as I kind of showed with our common data model, we may like some of those fields that we saw earlier, right? Whether it's account, contact, phone call, email, a lot of those things are really reusable from application to application, right? But there can also maybe be some fields, right? Some business specific or organization specific data that you perhaps want to be able to reuse. And so what the common data model, and particularly as we're kind of taking a look at entity, it allows us to do is to be able to create and do that. And so if we were to go into a new entity, we can come in here and we can create our specific entity. And so as I described, earlier in the solution I sent, we wanted to create an entity that was called device order, right? And so if you guys went through the package that I sent out, you would see that we created our entity and we attached the common data model, the database that we built, to our form, right? Because as you can tell, and we can actually just go back to our form here, right? And so let's just say I was to edit our form. Just give it a second here. So we'll just go ahead and skip this. And so now we're seeing our form, but now we're in the make portal, the editing IDE. And then within our left pane here, we can actually click on our data sources. And as we talked about before, in our first particular session, we utilized the Excel sheet, right? But as I described in the accompanying document, we added our device orders, right? We create with our environment that we created, we were able to connect to our common data service. And so now our fields are now tied into our database. So now when we go ahead and we commit and we make orders like I did earlier, right? We can now go in and actually take a look at those orders. So let's go ahead and take a look at that entity we created. And of course, for the sake of our particular application, we came up with a unique name and we called it device order, right? And then you'll see the name here. And it's very similar, but one of the types that you'll see here is a custom, right? And so that's telling us it's one of the custom entities that we created. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on our entity. And so now within our particular entity, we're now seeing those same fields that we reused in our form, right? The approval status, the approver, created by, device name, and we identified that as our primary field, device order, ship date, right? And so one of the main things that you certainly would like to be able to do within any database, right? You would like to be able to understand what the data is, and for those of you who are familiar with, just working within SQL Server or some of today's databases, within our Maker portal and connected to our data source, we can click on our data tab and we can see our data, right? We can see some of the things that we've worked in. So, these are some of the solutions I created previously, right? But certainly what you guys can see, and again, this is on the West Coast, I believe. Time is off a little bit there, but this is our Microsoft Surface app that we just added, right? And so now one of the things that you can certainly say, all right, we have our data. And again, this was a very straightforward solution, but you can certainly imagine if you are creating maybe a more complex application, right? Maybe a more complex solution where it's an invoice and there's a number of fields that maybe you want to be able to report on. Now you have that data. Now you're storing that data. And within this environment, maybe you would like to take that data and be able to move forward and perhaps kind of provide that for additional reporting. And one of the things that Microsoft certainly gives you is the ability to either export that data, and as we see here, export to a data lake. And one of the things that I certainly would like to be able to mention, as we kind of talk about utilizing this data for further analysis, maybe to gain insights, this is something that is built in, and being able to utilize it in the data lake, to me, is perhaps the preferred way of doing that. Because again, when we're talking about, and I mentioned earlier, our sub-theme is unify your organization. When we're talking about perhaps sharing a commonality between applications, having a repository that can support storing data regardless of what that data looks like. So for instance, right now, as we're seeing here, this is in a tabular format, right? But let's just say some of the data that we may be looking at, that we may look to provide insight on, it may not be in this format, right? It could be a CSV. What the data lake allows you is to be able to store a bunch of data together and be able to query it, be able to glean data from an assortment of data types and data formats. And I think that's why you find, if you talk to a lot of data scientists and data engineer, they like the data lake, right? Because the data lake does give you that flexibility to be able to glean that data and be able to work with that data. Okay, so I wanted to kind of step through this at a very high level. Like I said, we sent the assets, and the assets that we sent today is the completed solution. As I mentioned before, if this is going to be something you work with, certainly establishing a test environment where you can kind of go ahead and work on your own and be able to take a look first at that completed device ordering app, right? Because I know in the last session, we kind of, the focus on that was creating that user experience, creating that PowerApp form. But what we sent out today was that completed form. But really kind of the focus of that is now establishing that environment, right? And so as we kind of take a look at our next 2 sessions, we're going to start taking a look at, now we're capturing our data. What can we do with that? How do we report on that? How do we provide further insights to folks in our organization? And we're going to touch on that. We're going to work on it. And particularly within this series, we're going to use the, and I think I kind of, definitely gave you guys a heads up of where we're going with this, but we're going to actually work with that data in an Azure data lake, right? We're going to show you the ability to be able to maybe query this data, or maybe there's a CSV form, and maybe there's some other information from maybe a non-Microsoft line of business system that you want to bring together, aggregate to provide one single pane of glass as a report, maybe to C-level individual. We're going to take a look at that and see why the Azure Data Lake is one of those solutions that you'd be able to do that, and why it's so powerful and really so highly regarded, like I say, by those data engineers, by those data scientists. Okay, so certainly, take a look at the information we sent. Feel free to reach out to us. In that information I sent out today, we included contact information. And if there are any questions at all, feel free to reach out to us. I believe the email address we have is contact us at mdsny.com. So again, if there are any questions at all, feel free to go ahead and reach out to us using that address. Okay. And so, as we said, we'll continue with our Power Platform Showcase solution, utilizing our West Indies oil and gas, and of course, our device ordering app. And so, what we hope that you come out of this with is the way that the common data model would be a way, in particular the common data service, a way for you to begin looking at a way to kind of having that common data schema, right? A way where you can provide data uniformity across your productivity applications and line of business applications, and really make your workloads much more efficient by having that uniformity. Okay. So one of the things I'd like to certainly point out, we'll continue our conversations on the CDS as well as M365 and REO. And for those of you who's wondering what REO is, it's probably an acronym that doesn't seem as familiar as CDS and M365. That's REO Speedwagon. But certainly during our podcast, check it out later on this month, and we'll kind of talk to you a little bit about what the commonality between those items are. Okay. So thank you guys for coming, and I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Sam.
Perfect. Thank you, Patrick. That was great. So can you just go to the next slide, please? So we do have another webinar coming up. It will be scheduled for June 2nd, so in about 1 month's time. And as Patrick mentioned, we're going to be continuing on this PowerApps journey. So please look out for the follow-up email that I'll be sending you tomorrow with not only the information from this webinar, but the link to register for the next one. And then next slide. Feel free to follow us on social media. We have all the different ones listed there, and then we also have a monthly newsletter that it's really good to have updated on, anything technology related, the news and offerings that are coming out from our partners. So at this time, we have about 15 minutes left. So I'd like to open it up to Q&A. If anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them into the chat, and I will read them aloud to Patrick. Doesn't look like there's any coming in, but as Patrick mentioned, we do have the email address right there that you can email us with any questions. You can email Patrick directly. He'll be on that follow-up email tomorrow, and this will allow you to have a one-on-one time with him to answer questions regarding your business. So with that being said, thank you all for joining us today. We hope you all are safe and well, and we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar.